Good afternoon, I'm Andrew Neil and welcome to my new lunchtime show here on Times Radio, your election station. Now, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse for Rishi Sunak and the Tories, it did. Yesterday was the worst day of the election campaign for them, so far. There could be worse days to come. Two massive opinion polls showed the Tory campaign had changed nothing. The Tories were still heading for a serious thumping, with Labour projected to have a majority of over 100 in one poll and almost 200 in another. If that wasn't bad enough, then came the coup de grace. Nigel Farage decided to take over the leadership of the Reform Party and stand in Clacton, just about the most pro-Brexit constituency in the country. This has electrified a hitherto lacklustre campaign. It will galvanise support for reform. Not that it will necessarily win many or even any seats, but with Farage at the helm, a leader who enjoys an 80% approval rating among reform-minded voters, it will take even more votes away from the Tories and allow Labour to win even more Tory seats. The Conservatives, of course, will claim that a vote for reform is a vote for Labour. But that's precisely the Farage strategy. His hope is that the Tories will be reduced to enough of a rump after July the 4th that they'll be vulnerable to a hostile takeover by Farage and the reformers. This used to be the stuff of wild speculation late at night in right-wing circles when too much had been drunk and common sense had left the building. It's now a real possibility. Whether or not Farage wins Clacton, the winning it would strengthen his purpose. Of course, a post-election hostile takeover would rip the Tories apart, much as Donald Trump's MAGA movement has ripped the Republican Party apart. But Trump succeeded. It's now his party. The anti-Trump Republicans have been vanquished. Farage may think he can emulate his mate in America. We do not yet know if this will happen, but if the Tories are close to wipeout on July the 4th, there's a good chance that it could. And if it does, the election of 2024 becomes an event of historic proportions, a watershed in our politics, like the emergence of a new Conservative Party in the 1840s, after it tore itself apart over the repeal of the Corn Laws, or Labour replacing the Liberals as the main party of the left in the early part of the last century. The populist right already has the upper hand over other right-wing groups in America, France, Holland, Hungary, Italy. It's strong in Germany, Poland, Spain, Sweden. There's no reason why Britain should be immune to this cross-border trend. Suddenly, the 2024 election has a potential significance beyond what we foresaw when it was first called. More than just the passing of power from Tory to Labour, the remaking of UK politics, no less. The possible demise of the oldest and most successful political party in the democratic world. That's almost as important as Ed Davey going overboard.
You think it's very funny, and you assume that if somebody like me says, this is a broken system, these people are immoral, they are very bad at their jobs, they should not be doing it, this is a shameful disgrace, that I can only be saying this because I'm bitter or I'm a loser, because I lost the horse race. But I would like you to consider the possibility that there may be another way of looking at this, which is that there are values, there are things that matter. And Liz Truss may have become Prime Minister, but she was a very poor minister, she was a very poor cabinet minister, and she was a very poor Prime Minister. And that is something that is a problem in our country. This isn't just a game making it to the top. And I think it's perfectly fair for me, on the basis of 9.5 years, which is quite a long time in politics, looking at it quite carefully, to say this is a broken system. And I think it's possible to be taken seriously for saying that without you turning around and saying, well, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm just a loser because I didn't become Prime Minister.
No, my point is more that you could have stayed in the game and changed the system rather than going off and
how, Matt? I mean, this is the point. Look at what happened to the people who stayed. The problem is, and there's a logic here. Why are the Conservatives in trouble? They're in trouble fundamentally because they got behind Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And why did they do that? They did it because they put the pursuit of power above values, above ideas. The majority of my colleagues knew that Boris Johnson was somebody who would be a terrible Prime Minister. They knew that his policies didn't add up, and they got behind him. And you can see now that that's why they've blown an 80-seat majority and they're going into defeat, because people sense that there are no values here. There are no principles. There are no ideas. This is a party that became so obsessed with playing a game. Putting Liz Truss in was another dramatic example of this. And it blew up in their faces. So it sounds fine to say, stick with it, team player, compromise, hold your nose, it's all fine. But the result is catastrophe.
I suppose the counter argument to that is the case study of Keir Starmer, who served under Jeremy Corbyn, appears, I mean, quite extraordinarily, all the criticism of being boring or, not knowing what he stands for, has gone from the extraordinary position of that defeat in 2019 to now being on the cusp of potentially, if the polls are to be believed, a record landslide. There is another path. That's essentially the only question I was putting to you.
Sure, there's another path, and you're right. And I guess Jack Straw would be another example of that kind of politician. That's the kind of politician, I suppose, that Rishi Sunak thought he was, or Nadhim Zahawi thought he was, or maybe the current Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, who all these people endorse Boris Johnson, and I guess they probably would say what you're saying. But my question is, what is the cost of that? And that we'll see this with Keir Starmer. Obviously there's something different about Keir Starmer, who was prepared to be in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet, and many of the people that I liked a lot in the Labour Party who refused to do that, some of whom actually left the Labour Party. And the question is, where is the line between doing what you need to do to take power and actually having ideas? Where are the policies? Where are the beliefs? Where's the conviction? And we don't know yet with Keir Starmer. I mean, it may be that after the election, it turns out that he's a very, very unusual person who's able to endorse Jeremy Corbyn, get behind that, and then get into power and push ahead with very clear, consistent, bold ideas. But if so, he's unusual. Generally speaking, if you compromise too much, if you go too far down this game, you begin to lose yourself.
Do you think that you sleep better at night than some of your colleagues in the Tory party?
I don't sleep very well at night, so
These things are all relative.
I was up worrying half the night about politics and things. So no, I don't
really. Even now, genuinely, that's a thing that keeps you up at night, worrying about the state of politics today.
I woke up, I think, at 2:45 in the morning, and I got to sleep just before 6.
And what was it that woke you up in the middle of the night?
Oh, lots of things. I was in brains at that time at night, but I was thinking, am I being too pompous? Am I allowing people to praise me too much? Do I really know what I'd be doing with the NHS? Have I become too glib? Do I really understand what decision I've made? I mean, these questions you've asked me about, I mean, obviously I'm being a bit defensive, but I mean, they're perfectly valid. I mean, I would much rather be Prime Minister than be presenting a podcast. Obviously, my life until recently was different types of government. As you said, I was a civil servant. So I feel a lot of guilt. But I'm also intrigued by the way in which, and I'm being a bit unfair to you here, but the way in which people who are close to the politicians, particularly the lobby journalists, found themselves completely unable to take seriously anything I'm saying in Politics on the Edge, and were only able to focus on what they thought was the big single fact, which is Boris Johnson won and I lost. And a lot of the reviews and commentary, and I've seen you do a little bit of this stuff, are about, obviously what's motivating Rory is he's just bitter. He's just jealous. He lost, so he's being mean about Boris Johnson.
Well, I think it's possible. I take your point.
I think it's possible that I may have a point, which is that maybe he was actually quite a bad person and quite a bad prime minister, and that it may be possible to say that without only being motivated by jealousy.
I think anyone who's ever looked at my coverage of Boris Johnson in the paper and on Times Radio will be aware that I think our views are probably more in line than they differ.
Of course, he wants to destroy the Conservative Party because his strategic view is that the weaker you are after this election, the more easy it'll be for him and his gang to take over. That's why he wants to destroy you. He wants to take you over.
Yes, but he will.
Doesn't he? Do you agree?
The thing is that if Nigel Farage is successful in his aim, what he will have done is to have devastated the centre-right, devastated that ground, handed
He
to...
doesn't care.
Well, I care. He may not. For him, it may be the case that being king of the desert is an admirable... Well, not an admirable. It's not an admirable goal at all. It may be that that's what he's aiming for, but it will be a desert.
I thought he was in the jungle.
Well, whatever ugly diet he may have had in the past, it will be very thin gruel for the right if he's successful.
There is a kind of Tory wipeout that you reduce to a rump. How vulnerable is your party to a hostile takeover from Reform?
I think we've got a pretty good immune system, and more to the point, Nigel Farage has been admirably honest and clear about what he wants to do in this election. He wants to see us crushed. He wants to grind us into the soil.
Well, so far so good.
Let's just wait and see, because the whole point is he should be careful what he wishes for, because if he is successful in his aims, then we will have a Labour majority which will undo all of the things for which he has claimed credit, and he will be directly to blame for having ushered in a leftward shift in British politics. So, yes, Nigel Farage has been admirably honest, but A, it's an ego trip, and B, he's also said that he wants to destroy the Conservative Party. I'm all for working with people from other parties, but if someone says it's their explicit aim to grind you into bone meal, then they're not your friend. I know that, again, during the Brexit referendum, the debates there certainly ensured that the Leave side entrenched its credibility. It has also been the case that there have been presidential debates in the US, which have been decisive. And also, in 2010, we saw the very first set of leader debates, which were responsible for Cleggmania.
I agree with Nick.
Exactly. In the end, it was a boomlet, which shows how careful you should be about the polls. The Lib Dems went up crazily, almost overtook us, and then crashed again under scrutiny. But they can have a decisive effect. But on the debate tonight, I think Starmer will fail on the detail. He has skills, but he knows diddly squat about economics. He is out of his depth in dealing with these questions. And I think if it's just a trading of sound bites, then he'll survive and he'll get through it. But if he's put under forensic interrogation on the economy, he will fall apart. He's like a mastermind contestant. His specialist subject, the Constitution, full marks on. But on general knowledge, and particularly on economics, then it's a big fat zero, I suspect.
And Al joins me now. Hi, Al.
That was funnier than I remember.
It's always better if you just get if something turns out to be funny rather than slightly less funny. I can't believe that's nearly 10 years ago. That
no.
Do you look back on that period fondly?
I see it as a tremendous adventure. We had a lot of fun. I learned a great deal. I would never do it again. As you probably understand. I mean, I've been beset with my Twitter feed's full of people, and even my aunt wrote to me, messaged me yesterday going, "Are you going to stand against Nigel Farage in Salford?" And I said, "Well, no, because he's running in Clacton." She said, No, it's definitely Salford. 5 minutes later, reappears. "Oh yes, sorry, you're right." So I mean, which is good that it's burned in her memory as firmly as it might be. I mean, it was a lot of fun. It was very weird. The weirdest element of it was some people's determination not to take it in the spirit in which it was intended, which was remarkable.
You saying that some people might behave with a certain degree of bad faith and humorlessness in politics seems extraordinary. So, Al, just to be absolutely clear, would you stand against Nigel Farage again as the pub landlord?
Well, I said my manager and I had this conversation yesterday because it would be a decision he'd be involved in. And I said, if someone gave me £1 million to do it, I'd do it. And he said, well, that isn't going to happen, is it?
And he'd be taking his 15%.
Well, exactly. So it's in his interest. But our view was, been there, done that. The idea was to do it that one time, to have some fun with it, and it was in response to something else anyway. It was more to do with Russell Brand than anything else. Because he said that in the autumn before, he'd said, "What's the point in voting? It doesn't change anything." And of course, we have ample proof that voting just changed things enormously. Actually, thanks very much, judging by the last 9 years. I will not do it again. Let's put it that way.